Real Sounds of Africa to once again kick off our World Football phone-in. It's a good job too, because we're talking football in Africa and in South America, and players from over there playing in our leagues. And not just players from over there playing in our leagues. Let's talk about the managers from over there plying their trade in our leagues. Well, we know there aren't any African managers plying their trades in our British leagues. So the Springbokker Junior, Mark Gleeson, won't have much to say in that respect. But I bet the Legendino Tim Vickery's got a lot to say about managers from over there plying their trade in our leagues. The spy who came in from Elland Road is the headline. The back pages of The Express this morning. Indeed it is. Good morning to you both.
Good morning.
Good morning, Tim. And Springbokker Junior, you there yet?
Good morning.
Good morning to you, sir. So, Mark Gleeson in Cape Town, Tim Vickery in Rio. Let's just get on with it because this is so fascinating. As one of our listeners, Daniel, has already said, I've got a feeling that World Football Phoning will blow up with the number of Bielsa spying calls tonight. Imagine the uproar if he used a tactical dog. No tactical dogs allowed, but 08085 909 693 is our number. And I imagine also there'll be a lot of questions from you about the January transfer window as well. So, Mark, I'm going to go to you first of all, given that this is a very Argentinian story. One of our listeners says, what's the difference between a scout and a spy?
A scout is someone who ostensibly is looking for talent, who watches football games from all spectres, junior, amateur, etc., and is in search of player talent to recommend to whoever he works for. A spy is probably someone not too dissimilar, but I suppose the connotation of the word is that he's going to cause nonsense, and he is doing something that he shouldn't be doing against the wishes of those he's doing it to. I just want to point out to you one thing, Dalton. We do have an African coaching in the English leagues.
I knew I got it wrong.
His name is Dino Mamria from Stevenage FC. And I'm not sure he got up to any shenanigans this week.
Oh, no, absolutely not. An African wouldn't go around spying, and they might go around scouting. Is Mark right, though, Tim? Is that the right definition between a scout and a spy?
Well, obviously, watching the opposition and collecting information on the opposition is just a normal part of the job. Yeah, it becomes, I suppose, a spy when ethical protocols are broken and when training sessions that are supposed to be secret, when you gain access to those. From a South American point of view, oh, what a big shrug of the shoulders. What on earth is all the fuss about? What's the matter with you? And I shall give you, oh, please sit down, and I shall give you a story. Grêmio of Brazil, they won the Copa Libertadores, South America's Champions League, in just over a year ago, the end of 2017. And they were discovered. Now, there is CIA style, ladies and gentlemen, plausible denial in this story. I shall get into that. But they were discovered, allegedly discovered, to have hired someone to have spot opponents' training sessions with the use of a drone. Oh, yes. Not just Heathrow Gatwick Airport that suffers from the drones. But there was someone, they were in the final against Lanús of Argentina, and a Lanús secret training session was spotted there with a drone was filming secretly, and the police chased after this man and took him down to the police station, and he denied any relationship with Grêmio. An investigation by a Brazilian media outlet alleged that he'd been with the club, he'd been hired with the club with a long track record in South American football. He'd been working for them for at least 5 months, doing similar things with other opponents and their training sessions. Gremio denied that they'd done anything illegal, and by the strict letter of the law, they hadn't done anything illegal. Gremio's coach shrugged his shoulders and said, well, football is for those who are sharp. That's the South American perspective. And wonderfully, the president of the aggrieved club, Lanús, said, I can't see any problems here. Even if they did gain access to secret training sessions, that's the way. So, conclusion. All's fair in love, war, and the Copa Libertadores.
Okay, we'll come back to this in a moment, I promise you. But for now, is that okay? Is Tim's explanation, and indeed Mark's definition...
we're being set up here, Tim.
No, not this time, actually. No, for a change, no. Is that what you think of me? That's how low I'm perceived about my colleagues.
For 250 other offences to be taken into consideration.
Yes, of course
please.
I will. Of course I will. But I'd love to hear from, whether it's Leeds fans or Bolton fans, because they clashed, of course, earlier on yesterday evening, or whether it's
Derby.
football. Sorry, what did I say? Leeds and Bolton.
Bolton.
I said, okay, Derby.
Bolton,
Apologies.
yeah.
Or whether it's just your general football fan. Is it okay to spy? 0800. Sorry, 08085 909 693. That's another of my offences, by the way, to be taken into consideration. 08085 909 693. If you'd like to join in World Football Fans.
Slowly, one number at a time, we'll get
Exactly. Simon is with us down under in Australia. Hello, how are you?
No, I'm very good, thank you. How are you doing?
Very well, thanks very much. After all we've done for you, after all we, Great Britain, have done for you, that's not a nice way to treat our star tennis player at the beginning of the Australian Open. You've made him cry, you've made him feel upset about the fact that he may not be able to play in Wimbledon again. Why can't you just let him be?
I blame the heat. That's what I do. I blame the heat.
Yeah, of course. That's a good excuse. Very good excuse. It won't be the same without him, though.
Well, yeah, definitely. I've always been a Fed Express fan myself, so yeah, I mean, good on him. But yeah, Roger Federer, he's the man.
You see, after all we've done for you, you're a Fed Express fan.
Yeah, well. You say tomato, I say tomato.
There you go. And we say football, you call it Aussie rules. But let's stick to the football if you don't mind. You've got a question for Tim.
I've actually got two questions, actually, if I can squeeze them in.
Of course you have.
The first question, Tim, bon dia. Gabriel Barbosa just got loaned back out to Flamengo, so just thought your opinions on that, if that's a good move for him or not. Personally, as a Flamengo fan, I think it's a great move. And the second question is, now, every time I watch South American football and there's a goal, I just wondered why the commentators, they always say, goal, for a long time. But the European commentators, when there's a goal, they don't really get that excited. So I just wondered if you knew where the origins of the South American commentator going crazy every goal came from.
I have a theory, and I'm going to share it with you. In many of the stadiums in South America, you're a long way from the pitch. You're a long way, and the radio commentator sometimes is a long way from the pitch. So one huge example of spending 25 seconds yelling goal is that it gives time for your assistant to tell you who scored it. It's brilliant, and it works, that is, and if you talk to commentators, they will tell you that the main function is identifying who put the ball into the back of the net. That's the one that they've got to get right. And the great Brian Moore, who used to do ITV, he didn't actually do the 66 World Cup final for BBC Radio, but he got one wrong. It was the FA Cup final of 1980. It's the first time I ever got drunk in my life, actually. And it was West Ham and Arsenal. And West Ham won it 1-0 with a headed goal from Trevor Brooking. And it was so rare for Trevor Brooking to head a ball that he didn't identify Trevor Brooking at the time. So when it went out on highlights the next day, he had to correct that, because you've got to get the goal scorer right. So the idea of yelling goal, I think, a part of it is it's a tradition that you kind of have to do. But I that maybe the birth of that tradition has something to do with the time it gives to make sure that someone on your radio team would identify the goal scorer and you can get that vital piece of information correct. In respect of Gabriel Barbosa, Gabigol, went to Inter Milan a couple of years ago. A spectacular failure, did nothing there at all, although he's not the only one who has gone to Inter Milan and not think. Went to Benfica, did nothing there. Back to Brazil, and he did all right for Santos last year. He was the top scorer of the Brazilian Championship, although they were kind of mid-table, so they weren't really pressure goals. He's a little bit precious and a bit brittle. He's been brought up to believe that he's something special. And that can be hard, for that kind of spoilt kid, South American, who then goes off to Europe to a big squad full of star names, and he finds out he's not Mr. Special anymore, he's only one. That can be... I think Inter Milan wanted to unload him, to loan him off to a European club, and English clubs were interested. I think Crystal Palace had a look, and certainly West Ham had a look, but they ran into work permit problems. So in the end, he's been loaned to Flamengo of Rio, who have a lot of money, and they are assembling a very, very deep squad. They just bought the Uruguayan playmaker, Arrascaeta, who's a good player. So it could well be an excellent springboard for him to really gain momentum, because if last year he was a top scorer in a club that didn't do a great deal, this year he's going to be the cutting edge in a very strong team that is expected to win titles. And if he can do that and get his momentum back, then who knows? I mean, just over 2 years ago now, 2.5 years ago, he was part of the team that won the Olympic gold medal for Brazil. And then the new coach took over the national team, and he had a problem. Who's going to be centre forward? Who am I going to go with? I could go with Gabriel Barbosa. I could go with Gabriel Jesus. He went with Gabriel Jesus, and he didn't regret it until the World Cup. And then, in the World Cup, it became a problem for him. But when he made that decision, it was nip and tuck between the two. And then Gabriel Jesus went on from strength to strength for a while, and Gabriel Barbosa has been kicking his heels. This move to Flamengo, it's only a loan move. It could well be a springboard to pick up momentum and maybe go back to Europe with a better head on his shoulders.
Simon, thank you very much for the call. Look forward to speaking to you again. I was only teasing about Andy Murray. We feel for him, though. We feel for him. But we're talking football, the game with the larger ball that you try and get in the net, not over the net. 08085 909 693 if you'd like to join in that conversation. And by the way, Mark, Max absolutely supports what you said, that scouting and spying are completely different. The fact is, this is cheating, Max says. You have to presume he's done this to every other team in the championship. That's Marcelo Bielsa. But as Tim was saying, in South America, they're wondering what all this fuss is about. Much ado about nothing from that perspective. Which side of that conundrum do you find yourself in? Is it cheating or is it part of the game? Whether you call it spying or scouting or whatever it might be. 08085 909 693. What about this question for you, if I might? Mark, West Bromwich Albion, they lost Solomon Rondon to Newcastle last season, and Lou in Birmingham is looking for a quality striker to replace. It's got to be quality to replace Solomon Rondon. Is there anybody in Africa that West Bromwich Albion might be able to sign in this transfer window or not?
No, what happens in Africa is as soon as you get 5 goals, you get snapped up and gone off the continent. We have an absolute dearth of decent strikers here. If you look at the leagues, the major leagues around the continent, you will find that all the leading goal scorers generally finish the season with between 9 and 12 goals. It really has become something of an endemic crisis on the continent. There was a Moroccan player, El Khatouri was his name, who did really well about 2 seasons ago, including cameo appearance at the Club World Cup and top scorer in the Champions League. But I mean, he was, barely off the stage collecting his awards, and he was whisked off to the Middle East, which is usually the primary destination for sort of overnight sensations, scoring sensations, particularly in the North African leagues. And then in places like Nigeria and Ghana and here in South Africa, as soon as you can score double figures, boom, you're off to Europe. So I'm afraid for the West Brom fan, you're looking for goal scorers. Like everywhere else, they're absolute hen's teeth. I think it's the cry at this time of year of virtually every club: find us a striker, and find us a decent striker who scores goals.
And is it the scouts or the spies in Africa that are out of work over this January transfer season?
It's the set-up artists and studios in Salford who are most gainfully employed.
That was low. That was low. I will take it. Ouch. On a serious note, in terms of January transfer window, has there been no activity in Africa? Are there not people there trying to do deals at all, whether it be for strikers or otherwise?
No, there's quite a lot. I mean, and the cry here is there's in our league here particularly in December we've had a fairly unusually high turnover of managers first. So there's a 16-team Premier League, 4 managers in December lose their jobs or change their jobs, and the rallying cry from every single one as he steps into his new post on the 1st of January is, I've asked the chairman to buy me a striker, or to get me a striker. Or we're looking for. There's one thing I need to fix up this team as a striker. So it's very much a hot topic, and papers, websites are full of speculation. Which team is going to buy which striker, but it's a common call every January almost. And I think these days, even in mid-season, when they do the real business, everybody is looking for a striker, and they are so decent strikers, so hard to come by, and when they do arrive, they are snapped up so quickly. It really is a sort of a mini crisis, I think, in modern football.
08085 90 9693. That's our number. If you've got any questions for the Springbokker Junior. Mark Gleeson on African football and players from there and managers from there. Let's not forget that. Playing in our leagues there. Feel free. I would love to hear from you. And also the Legendino Tim Vickery. We'll take your questions on South American football and their contingents playing over this side or playing their trade over this side. And we've got our American contingent in the house. World Football Phone-In's American contingent. So let's start with Glenn in Connecticut. Hello, Glenn.
Hey, Dan. How are you doing tonight?
Very well, sir. Very well. Good to speak to you. And you want to talk about what?
Yeah, so my question is for Tim. I'm really intrigued about the South American Youth Championship that I believe starts next Friday or Saturday, if I'm not mistaken. My focus is more on the Ecuadorian national team. I've already given up on the senior team. I've already written off the next World Cup qualification. We're not going to qualify, so I'm putting more of my emphasis on the youth. I just want to know if there's any exciting youngsters coming up that will maybe give us a good competitive edge come 2026. I already know that Gonzalo Plata has been scouted by Barcelona of Spain, but nothing concrete has come up since the scouting. So I just want to know if there's anything good coming up.
Well, there's Stephen Plaza, the centre forward who's gone to Vallecano, who looks very, very physically strong. I wouldn't be quite as down, Glenn, on Ecuador in 2022 as you are. Some of the recent stuff, a good win over Peru, a good win, 2-0 win over Peru back in November, when they got the counter-attack going. Well, I wouldn't be quite as down on them. One of the great clubs to look to for youth work is Independiente del Valle, little club on the outskirts of Quito, who've made huge progress in the last 15 years based on grooming, identifying, grooming, developing and selling youth talent. I mean, the first one that they did that really got them on was Jefferson Montero, who went on to be a good player for Ecuador for a while, and then he ran into injuries. And he may still come again, but anyone that produces is potentially interesting. And there's a couple of graduates on this. Stephen Plaza, who's just gone to Valladolid, who came through very, very strongly in the last few months of the Ecuadorian season. And he's a produce of that club. There's a couple of producers of that club who've just gone to Emelec. Gabriel Cortez, who playmaker, who had time in Mexico, didn't quite come off, but he's now at Emelec. It's a huge club in Guayaquil. And Billy Arce, who's got a terrific name, and even though his name is Arce, he doesn't play at the back. He's a nice
I'm going to have to give you a yellow card for that one. That's a yellow card, first of the year.
He makes great runs as well, there's Arce.
Look,
I know I'm
flirting
with a red.
No, that's borderline red, sir. Borderline red.
You give him one more chance.
What if I say he's worth piles? Does that get me a red?
You're lucky I didn't hear that.
He came to Europe perhaps a little bit too soon, but he's going back to Emelec as well. And these are players at early 20s who've still got a lot to give. And what I like about the players, some of the players coming over, and some of the players that Independiente del Valle are developing, is that they are very, very, very physically strong, quick, producing plenty of wingers. And I think there are one or two good centre backs coming up. I quite like Felix Torres of Guayaquil. I think he's a good player as well. So, Glenn, I wouldn't be quite as down on Ecuador as you are. I think they've come a long way in a short period of time, and they were 25 years ago. They'd never been to a World Cup, and you couldn't really imagine them going to a World Cup. Now you certainly can. And I think there's some terrific players coming through. And one of the big changes is that they make far better use now of their Afro descendants, who are, it's a relatively small portion of Ecuadorian society. It's relatively restricted to 2 or 3 regions of the country, but those regions are producing lots and lots of footballers who have great physicality and no little technique as well. So I wouldn't be quite as down, Glenn. It's Thursday that the next version of the Under-20 Championship starts, held every 2 years. This one is in Chile. And there'll be a catalogue of stars on show. It's the part of my work that I most enjoy, really, the South American Under-20 Championships. It's where, of course, I first saw Lionel Messi 14 years ago. It's where his rise began. And so many great players have got to start there. Doing badly in the tournament doesn't necessarily mean failure. And 2 years ago, one of the failures were Brazil with Richarlison. I wonder whatever happened to him. But it's a terrific experience. And I'm thoroughly looking forward to the next version, which kicks off on Thursday.
Yeah, Glenn, forgive me for asking as well, and tell me to mind my own business if you like. You're not by any chance a government worker, are you, in the United States? Federal government worker or anything?
No, I'm not, unfortunately.
Okay, no. I was only going to say that if you were, we're happy for you to reverse the charges for this phone call, so we'll pay it because... Well... I'm just saying.
Whatever little power I have, I'll let it slide.
That's borderline yellow as well.
Well, no, you can't give the referee a yellow card. Glenn, thank you very much.
Sorry, suggesting a yellow for the referee is in itself a yellow.
I know. I'm going to send him to the stands in a minute. Don't worry. But Glenn, thank you very much. Yeah, really good to speak to you.
Thanks for taking my calls, guy. Cheers.
It's a pleasure, and speak again very soon. I look forward to it. There is an interesting one here for you, Mark, from Kevin, who says, could I ask Mark about my fellow Dundonian, Simon Murray, how he's doing in South Africa with Bidvest, and are people able to understand his Dundee twang? That's from Kevin in Reykjavik. So Dundonians are obviously going all around the world for this one.
Yeah, he signed for big club in Johannesburg, actually leading the log table at the moment, although they did lose at home in midweek. He didn't play in that particular game. He's the top goal scorer of the club with a measly 4, but he's made a decent impression. He's a good hard worker up front, does a lot of running, likes to holds up the ball well. In this country, there are a lot of players very good very skillful with the ball, but lacking sort of basic technique, lacking the ability to hit with both the left and right. The shooting statistics are absolutely appalling in this country. Shots on target versus attempts. So there is always a place in the market for a good bustling sort of European centre forward who might not have all of the bells and whistles in terms of skills and flair, but holds the ball up well, is very strong, runs very hard, and they're always well appreciated by the fans as well. I think he's having a great time. In fact, I saw a tweet from him the other day where he got a hole-in-one on the golf course. So I think that's probably brought him more joy than the four goals he scored. But he's doing well, and the fans like him. He's this shock of red hair, which is also a little unusual for the South African League. So he certainly stands out from the crowd, and I think he's enjoying himself, and the fans are enjoying him.
08085 909 693. The numbers to call if you'd like to join in this morning's World Football Phone-In. So we're talking loosely, at least, about football in Africa and South America and players from over there playing in our leagues. Tonight we're also talking about at least one coach from South America who plies his trade in our league, Marcelo Bielsa, because of his admission that he's been spying on behalf of Leeds United. Great headline in the back page of the Express is the spy who came in from Elland Road. But is it spying or is it scouting? That's one of the questions we've been asked. In South America, they don't seem to think it's a big deal. In the rest of the world, as Marcus Express is probably seen as much more serious. Which side of that conundrum do you fall on? 08085 909 693. We'll speak to Bill in Jersey City in a moment or two. This is the World Football Phone-In with the legendary Tim Vickery in Rio and the Springboker Junior Mark Gleeson in Cape Town. And your calls, obviously, is what this is about. 08085 909 693. They're talking football in Africa and South America and players from over there playing in our leagues, talking about Spygate, also talking about January transfer windows, amongst other things. And Bill in Jersey City, what did you want to talk about?
Good morning, everybody.
Good morning to you.
I wanted to ask Tim. I've read a couple reports this week from the South American sports press suggesting that the 2020 Copa Libertadores could feature the return of Mexican clubs to the competition, as well as the introduction of clubs from Major League Soccer in the United States possibly joining the Copa Libertadores. Does Tim know if there's any truth to some of these rumors?
Ask him.
I know that it's been speculated, and I think CONMEBOL, the South American Confederation, would like this very much. Whether it's the best way forward, I'm not entirely sure.
I apologise, Bill. Let me just interrupt there, Tim, because do you want to just reiterate for listeners who might have missed that, because it's a pretty poor line, actually, what Bill's question was? I just about got it.
Bill's question is that on the Copa Libertadores, South America's Champions League, it's being speculated that Mexican teams will return to the competition. Now, we had Mexico invited. Mexico is in North America. It's a long, long way from South America. The distance between Buenos Aires and Mexico City is further than the distance between London and a number of cities in India. It's a big, big place, the Americas. So Mexican teams who were invited between 1998 and then a couple of years ago, it is speculated that they may return in 2020, and also that there could be a place for Major League Soccer teams in the Libertadores. Clearly, now, I've come to the conclusion that the only solution that I can see for club football in South America, which, on the standard of which has got worse and worse and worse in the 24 and a half years that I've been here, I think that's a coincidence. I don't think you can pin that entirely on me. But the only solution is an external one, and that would be more contact with Mexico and the United States. The synergies are obvious. Football in the United States, Major League Soccer, it's got real momentum behind it. But there is still, because it has no tradition, there's still a lack of credibility. South American football, club football, is in exactly the opposite position. It's got credibility to burn, but in terms of momentum, in terms of financial momentum and so on, it's going in the wrong direction. So there are obvious synergies there. However, my potential problem with getting the Mexican teams and the United States teams into the Libertadores is twofold. One is logistical, because of those distances, and the distances are absolutely huge. The other, I think, is political, because an inevitable consequence of this would be to undermine the Champions League of the CONCACAF region. Now, CONCACAF has lots of little countries, and so there's lots of votes there in the Caribbean, and it would be a disaster for teams of, say, Costa Rica and Nicaragua and the Caribbean region if they were to lose the chance, if their Champions League were to be weakened by South America cherry-picking Mexico and the United States. So I wonder if I can understand why the South America would like to do this and have it under the umbrella of the Libertadores, because then South America has control of it. But I wonder whether a better solution in the long term may be for the Libertadores to stay South American and the CONCACAF Champions League to stay CONCACAF in order to help develop football in the smaller countries of that region. And then perhaps, how about it, Bill, some kind of annual tournament between, say, the best four in the Libertadores and the best four in the CONCACAF Champions League. So that way, if you have it on a tournament basis between 8 teams, you can stage it in one country, maybe Mexico one year, or maybe Colombia the next, and so on. So that does away with the political problem, because the CONCACAF Champions League is not undermined, and it also does away with the problem of logistics, because you have it, in one host country. I think that will be a huge attraction, and I think it will be lucrative as well. So that's the way that I would like things to move forward, and I hope that they do. Let's take a front seat, row seat, and sit back and wait and see how it unfolds.
And despite the poor line, Bill, how about that? Is that something that you'd give the thumbs up to?
I'd give the thumbs up to it. I think it's going to happen mostly because now that the Copa Libertadores final is a one-off, it was nearly played in Miami this year after it was forced to move from Buenos Aires, and I think the CONMEBOL would do anything to have a final played here in the United States to get that extra money pumped into the tournament, much like the Copa America in 2016.
There I was apologising for the poor line, and then you came back and the line was perfect. The line was perfect.
It just needed some practice.
I was wondering whether it was actually. You say that. I was wondering whether it was spying or scouting that improved the line.
I just went to stand by the window. That's all I did.
Well done, you. Well done. That's the right answer. Thank you, Bill. And I look forward to speaking to you again.
This is the longest drum roll in the history of the program.
What, the spying or scouting?
Yeah, you've been sitting behind that drum kit slowly.
Well, it's
drumming up and down, and we're waiting for the crescendo and the punchline.
Well, I'll tell you this. I don't think there's a punchline tonight. But when I look at the texts and emails that have come in, I can assure you this is one of the main questions that listeners have been talking about. For example, this is part of the drum roll. This is from Tom in Lancashire, who says, listening to 5 Live Friday Social and the revelation this evening that Marcelo Bielsa has used spies against Derby, but that he's done this countless times in the past. When Maurizio Pochettino was asked about this story, he also expressed no surprise and accepted this is part and parcel of the game. How is this kind of tactic viewed in each of your regions, and what do you think the penalty should be for teams that engage in such tactics? It's Tom in Lancashire, and although Tim told us how it's viewed in South America, we didn't really get your view of how it's viewed generally in Africa.
No, it would be viewed with massive scorn. I mean, we've never really had any great incidents of this, but here the level of suspicion and intrigue and stuff is massive, particularly before big matches. And of course, there are lots of stories more around people going to do little ceremonies on the rival team's pitch on the eve of the stadium. That happens fairly frequently, and they're often, I mean, some of the big clubs here in South Africa in particular have security guards at their stadium the night before a big match, because the rivals will be coming along with some sort of concoction to spray on the pitch to try and influence the game. And that becomes an absolutely massive issue when someone is caught arriving or lurking around the precinct at the stadium trying to gain entry to be able to put their match-winning lotion onto the field. That's,
does it work? Does it ever work?
Sometimes it does.
You're not serious, are you?
No, of course not. But it's very much part of the game here. I mean, it's very well documented. They show it on television all the time when all of the big clubs walk out onto the pitch for the traditional, when you arrive at the stadium, you get off the bus, you're still in your sort of club tracksuit or sometimes in your suit, and you walk out onto the field just to have a little look around. There's not too many people in the stands. Usually I'm working for television, and we're there pretty early, and there's always a guy walking with the team, ostensibly a security bloke, who's got a water bottle in his hand, and he's spraying every now and then, and they walk to the goal mouth and they all stand inside the goal, and then sort of something gets sprayed, and then the opposition team comes along and does pretty much the same. It's great theatre in this country, and it happens all over African football. It's wonderful. It's very much part of the game. A lot of people pour scorn on it. I really like it. I think, every country's got its suspicions and its foibles. I suppose that's a whole new program on the silly things that footballers or football teams do before games, or supporters do before games. But here it's a rich part of the tradition, and I think it's pretty much the same in other continents. It's just people do it a bit differently. They hop over the line, or they put on their left sock instead of their right sock. Here we've got lotions and potions.
And at least you're giving us examples of how people believe spying, if you like, or whatever it might be called, affects the game. I would like to talk to you both in a moment or two, because the aspect of this, one of the aspects of this that we haven't covered is whether it makes any difference and what difference it makes in that case. Come on to that in just a moment. I don't want to keep Alan in Santa Monica, my rival in terms of refereeing at least, who's with us now. Hello, Alan, how are you?
Yeah, good morning, everybody. Hello. More of your US contingent arriving. Hello.
Of course, that's what we want. We want the battalion to come. And you've got a question for Mark and Tim.
Yeah, no, that's right. Tim was right earlier about the momentum over here in the US. Maybe I'll just build a little bit on that. And the questions I've got really is for both Mark and for Tim, is around the makeup of the crowds and the culture of watching. And I'll tell you the reason for this. I was refereeing last week, and the ref I was with told me his daughter runs a podcast. And so she does this podcast in the US, and he said, listen to it. And I did. And it was really noticeably different from what I've been used to. So she's covering the Premier League from a US perspective. So she was from the US, but she was also a woman as well. And she was actually pushing back against some of the heavy drinking, fat English guys in nylon jerseys, and that kind of culture was coming with the Premier League as well, and they wanted to have their own culture as well, and so they were talking about soccer in terms of the game and so on. So the question made me think as well, hang on, are we exporting the Premier League? Are we exporting the drinking culture as well? And people in Africa, are they got their nylon shorts on in the pub, screaming and shouting and singing and perhaps getting out of hand? Do you get women watching at the games? What is the culture of watching in each of the regions? And
before I ask both Mark and Tim to answer that, do you remember what the name of the podcast is?
Yeah, I'd like to give you a shout out for it, because I'm not. It's called The Full Kit, and then the last word. It's funny. I can't say it on the English word.
Okay, don't.
Network. I won't. But it begins with W, and in America, it's not seen as a bad word. But the podcast is written to say the people that go down the pub in a full kit and drink the beer and all the rest of it and shouting and that. It's actually very boorish behaviour.
Yeah,
you know?
I think 50 Cent did a track about that, using that word. But anyway,
that word, yeah. Okay.
And I did wonder at the time, does it mean the same thing over there? Yeah, no, he did.
People over here don't know, but
yeah.
you can get it on all the podcast outlets. You can dial up to it. I really recommend listening to it because it's good, it's funny. They even say football instead of soccer, so good on them.
Exactly, good for them. Okay, Tim, first of all, did we export beyond the footballing on the pitch? Did we export part of our football culture to South America? Which parts? And, how does it sit over there? Yeah,
just quickly on the... I presume it's the same W word in question.
It is.
I was watching a while back a film. Gerard Butler is an ex-player and he's now coaching kids in the States. And he keeps using a W word to these kids. We got to beat this lot of W words. And I'm thinking, you can't go around saying that, but obviously in the States you can. Rescind his red card.
And you're the only person who's ever said it on the World Football Phone-In, because there was a football team in Deportivo. Let's not go there. Yeah. Let's just not go there, please.
They couldn't work out why they kept on selling shirts to English tourists. They couldn't work it out. Absolutely
indeed,
brilliant.
Indeed.
Anyway, the culture of watching football. No, I don't think the English culture has exported that either historically or recently with the growth of the Premier League. I think when the big country here for exporting fan culture around the region has been Argentina, which has a hugely impressive, although very deeply problematic, fan culture. And the best thing about going to a game in Argentina these days is the songs. The songs are just fantastic. They're absolutely hypnotic. And they can keep them going for hours, and you come away from the games and those songs are just, the chants are just inside your head. It's brilliant. And the rest of the continent has always kind of picked up on that. And so our Argentine fan culture is the big mover. Now, having said that, there are changes happening in fan culture in South America, to a greater or lesser extent, depending on where you are. And the continent is changing as well in terms of gender roles. And it's a very macho continent, but that's kind of being challenged a little bit more. So you're beginning to you get more women now supporting, which is great, and playing an active role in supporters groups, and beginning to get on media as well. Part really, I suppose, if I can just get political briefly. Part of the win in the Brazil's presidential elections for Bolsonaro is a kind of desire to push back against this progress. On Bolsonaro's declared aim is to kind of recreate the Brazil of the 1960s, where everyone kind of knew their place. So those kind of changes, you do see them in the stands as well. And another thing which has brought about changes is increased ticket prices, which means that some of the social component of who goes to the stadium also changes. And one of the wonderful things about football is whatever changes are happening in society, they will get into the stadium somehow. When the next frontier here, it's timid at the moment, and what has happened politically in Brazil may well retard its progress in this country, but anti-homophobia. This is still very, very early stages, but it's beginning. Lines are beginning to be drawn to say, well, this isn't really acceptable, and I'm very interested to see where this will go, because 20 years ago you couldn't imagine this even being seen as a problem in terms of fan behaviour. Now it is. Where is this going to go? Hopefully in progressive directions.
We'll watch that space. And Mark, in Africa, how much of the football fan culture from Britain is exported over there?
Yeah, not particularly much. I do think the phenomenon of people in shirts in pubs is, I don't know if it was necessarily exported. I think it's worldwide, and it's fairly common, and certainly here when there are big games on, fans and people don't travel as readily as they do in other countries because of the vast distances, because of economic reasons, and therefore they're congregating with your shirt around a television set, oftentimes with a drink in hand, is not uncommon. On the terraces, though, I think oftentimes I'm of the opinion, and I've yet to prove this right, but I oftentimes look out at the crowd and find that in African football, going to a football match is an opportunity to sort of meet, to sing and to dance, and the football often looks to be fairly irrelevant to the fan. It doesn't have that passionate follow that you have on the terraces in Europe. That you can hear the crowd gasping at or gasping at every sort of amazing moment, or clapping a good pass, and sort of the noise picking up as the attack sort of develops. In Africa, it's almost a rhythmic, monotonous rhythmic noise as people are dancing, they're talking, they're enjoying, and the game is almost superfluous to the self-made entertainment on the terraces. I mean, that's possibly not true of many matches, but I do think that's a fairly unique African phenomenon, and it's relatively common.
And is it right across the continent? Because I did experience some of that in 2010 when Five Live sent me to Nigeria and Ghana, and I was amongst the fans. And I remember particularly the opening game, Nigeria versus Argentina, what they call a viewing centre there, loosely, and also the game Ghana versus Uruguay as well, the controversial one with the handball incident. Is it, of course, Suarez in it. And I just remember, particularly in the Ghana one, that exactly as you say, before the match, they had this kind of, it was almost as if we were going to some religious festival with, a drummer there, a drummer leading a line of people coming behind him and singing and dancing and so on. But is that the case right through Africa, including the Francophone countries?
Yeah, not as much in the Francophone countries, but here in South Africa it's quite big. I'd say the only place where it's not different, where it's much more sort of European, particularly in terms of aggression, etc., is in North Africa, and they have a lot of influence there. The supporters, the Tunisians and the Algerians, Moroccans in particular, call themselves ultras. They copy very much what they see on television from Italy, from Spain, and particularly in the days before satellite television, you could have watched Italian television in Tunisia. It's not that far away, and you could certainly have watched Spanish television in Morocco before the days of satellite. So they would have got a lot of influence from those fans, from watching what they do from the television matches, and so it's a lot more aggressive. It's a lot more. I wouldn't say dangerous, but it's certainly a long way from that docile, everybody dancing in the same direction, doing little trains around the seats, and almost sort of the football is just a passing show that's happening out on the grass there. That's often very true of games south of the Sahara.
I said we'll come back and talk about, what difference spying or otherwise makes. And Alan in Santa Monica, thank you very much for the call as well. We'll come back in a moment to talk about the impact of spying or scouting or whatever it might be to the game on 08085909693. If you'd like to join us for this morning's World Football phone-in, so we're talking football in Africa and South America, players from over there playing in our leagues as always, but I think we have to add players and coaches plying their trade over this side. Any questions you've got for the Legnadino Tim Vickery in Rio and the Springbokker Junior Mark Gleeson in Cape Town, taking care of your questions and comments on football in South America and Africa respectively, then feel free. We've got an email here that I'm going to have to read out in full from one of our listeners who says, long time listener, not just a long time listener, but a long time listener, if you see what I mean. And our listener says, I can manage to say I've called once over 10 plus years that I've listened. Well done. Only once. So once every 10 years, we should get another call from you soon then, shouldn't we? If you're a long time listener. Anyway, he says, he or she, by the way, says, your program has helped me overcome difficulties, very difficult times, and provided many laughs during many deployments in faraway places. Now, think about that. So we're talking about a squaddy here. We'll come back and I'll read you the rest of the email in a second. He reprimands Seth. Yeah. Top team for us tonight, of course, on a Saturday morning, our World Football phoning team, always top, on 0808 590 9693. That's the phone number if you'd like to speak to our top team this morning. So we've got the Springbokker Junior, Mark Gleeson, taking care of any questions or comments you've got on football in Africa. He's the oracle of football on that continent. And if you'd like to speak to him about footballers from over there or playing in our own leagues, then feel free. And also the Legendino, top team, of course, with him, can't be without him, covering South America for us and players from over there playing in our leagues as well. 08085 909 693. That number once again. And this will be an interesting one for Mark. Oh, before I get there, okay, let me finish this email. Apologies. Let me finish this email. So it's an email from a long time listener, has been listening to us for yongs, has called once over the last 10 years. The programme has helped our listener overcome difficult times and provided many laughs during many deployments far away from home. And our listener says, I mostly get your programme via podcast, and I just had to say, while you were away, that's me, over the Christmas and New Year, while you were away, Dawson, there were some violations on the show. Tim, did you not mention this to me at all? Violations?
Well, the big violation, I think, was the pronunciation of Desikan's surname, which that was...
Funny enough, that's not mentioned here. Somebody else mentioned it on another email that Tim is keeping a low profile with regards to Desikan earlier on, because I thought you had already joined us before 2 o'clock. So I said to Desikan, here's somebody who wants to talk to you and wants to address you by your full name.
Not my fault. I would have done it. I would have done Desikan through Narayana Puram, but I wasn't going to do it.
If you could do it live when he's here, then do. But I suspect that you've been practicing for weeks on that one. Anyway, the violations our listeners talking about. Our listener said, I think it must have been Seth who was the host and failed to use the coveted Brazilian shirt name for both the Legendino and the Colonel. Me being a military man, right, so you are a man, okay, apologies. Me being a military man, the Brazilian shirt names are like ranks in the military, and if you don't address both high-ranking officers with the proper title, you should be assigned some field duty. Seth is listening, I know. He's going to get the field duty. You are going to get it, Seth. Anyway, one football question. What do supporters and football players, as well as managers and directors, think of the transfer window in your respective regions? Is it as big a deal as they make it in Europe compared to your respective regions? Mark first.
Yes, it is. And I mean, they've taken a note, as they've done with many other things, from the European experience. But the fulsome coverage that you would have on your sports channels, for example, on deadline day, is mirrored in many African countries. There's a lot of excitement about the month. There's a lot of speculation in the papers about who's going where. Then on the 1st of January, the clubs rush actually these days to send out announcements, usually on social media, about, we're first in the marketplace, we've signed up so-and-so and so-and-so. We've had a bevy of stuff here in South Africa over the last 10 days of movements and, clubs showing their supporters that they're doing work, that they're working hard to bring in decent players for the second half of the season. And then, of course, on January the 31st, there will be a lot more attention, and there'll be even one or two satellite tracks outside the league offices, seeing who comes and goes, pretty much the same way as you have it in the UK. I was on a different discussion panel, BBC discussion panel, about the transfer window recently, and I think it's a great addition to one of the many little side shows that we have in football. I do remember the days when there were no transfer windows, the transfers happened, but I would like to remind people who are a little disparaging about the transfer windows that there was always a deadline, usually in March or so, after which you could not make any more signings. So you were free to sign from the beginning of the season till about 2/3 of the season were complete, and then you were not allowed to make any more changes. And even then, in those days, the last week or so of transfer availability was always frenetic and was always quite exciting, and it was always mirrored pretty much the deadline day that we have these days. Now that we've got these formal transfer windows, so I find it always very enjoyable to and always look forward to the day to see who's moving and how the drama unfolds.
Does it ever? Can you point to any points where it's made a tangible difference? The signing of one player in January.
That's a very, very, very good question, and I think no, not and I mean, coaches will tell you that these days they all seem to make sort of excuses as they're making the signings, sort of say, well, we've bought so and so and so, but there's no tangible evidence that a January signing has ever transformed a team and taken them from mid-table or whatever to championship in 6 months, and I think that's very true.
How about in South America, Tim?
It's a little bit different. On the one hand, there's no real kind of big kind of Jim White moments. The countdown to the closing of the window in the last few hours and all of that. When people back in England will like take the day off work to cover to follow the activity on the last day of the window. On the other hand, and this is a point in January, it's high summer over here, so there isn't any competitive football, and we've just got some pre-season friendlies going. But so all you've got at the moment is, in terms of hard news, is transfer news. So that gives the thing a bit of an oomph, so that there is a lot of pressure, especially from the big clubs. Who are we signing? Who are we signing? Who are we signing? But on the other hand, remember the other side of the coin. Who are we losing? Who are we losing? It's a time, especially as you get towards the end of the window, when there's a lot of insecurity around, when a lot of the coaches will be dreading it in a way, because their big fear over here, let's say that on the last day of the window, a European club comes in for their star player, lost him, can't replace him because it's too late in the window. So there's some dread around from the coaches, and as far as the players are concerned, it's kind of opportunity knocks. Is someone going to come in? Is the big chance going to happen? It might be the case that now you're here and suddenly the phone call is going to come in, and in 48 hours you're going to be somewhere totally else in the world. It's a strange way to make a living, isn't it, professional football? And I think sometimes we underestimate the effect that this has on people's families. Having to uproot them and take them right over to the other side of the world. How does this work in Africa, Mark? Because I'll tell you what's striking, talking to South American players, especially Brazilian players who've been in Europe for a long time and that their kids have developed in Europe. Sometimes, because the player might want to come home at the end of his time in Europe. He wants to come home and move back to Brazil. And sometimes that can be really, really hard for the kids because they haven't grown up here, and when they come here, my God, they get scared by the violence and so on because it hasn't been part of their existence in Europe. This ever-present fear of social violence and so on. Is that a factor with African players as well?
Yeah, I think so, and also just an economic factor, And I mean, there are many. I don't think there's ever been a scientific survey done over, but I would suggest to you that the vast majority of Africans who go across and play professional football at all levels in Europe to stay there, be it that relationships develop with locals. The example that you've given about the kids is a big one, and then just economic opportunity. You will find a lot of ex-African football players working in factories as chauffeurs, etc., around Europe. It'd be a very interesting academic study, actually, by someone. I don't know what point it would prove, but I would suggest to you that the vast majority stay. And remember, of course, it's led to some very fine footballers for European countries. Romelu Lukaku, dad was a Zairean international who played mid-level football in Belgium, stayed on. His two sons have gone on to play for Belgium. Divock Origi's Dad Michael Koth was a Kenyan international, and so on and so forth. So, they've left a little bit of a legacy as well, and helped the cause of several European countries.
Look, it often is the case that football is the prism through which we discuss wider issues, because what you've just described, both of you, is actually the migrant story. My older brother Yinka would come on and say, Dotton, that's our story, that is our story, because your parents came over, in my case, and I'm sure many other people whose parents came over would be regarded as part of the Windrush generation, as we call it now, came over either to study or to work, but they came over on a temporary basis, and when it came time to go home, the children that they now had overseas were as English or British as anything else, and you were literally going to transport them to a foreign country they had no connection with whatsoever, and that complicates the issue of being able to return to your home country, as well as complicates the issue, of course, of relationship between one generation and another. It really does divide families, that. And
I'm sure in your case, Dotton, you had a morbid fear of being smothered by big aunties
with big moustaches, as Eddie Murphy would have said once upon a time. Exactly. No, I loved my aunties, every single one of them. But thank you for that.
What was your relationship with Nigeria when you went there? After if you like, kind of inverted commas, becoming British, becoming a Londoner. When you went to Nigeria, as a young man or whatever, did it then freak you out?
Well, no, because I was born in Nigeria. I only came over when I was 6. When I went back when I was 17.
As a kid, so you go back and you're in a completely different place. You've got used to different things. What was it like going back for that first time?
Well, if you're going back for a visit, it's all right, because, of course, everybody spoils you, etc. But if your father says, right, we're packing our bags and going back, what about my friends? Why are you going to take me away? What have I done? And it's a great play called Pandora's Box by a remarkable dramatist called Ade Solanke. And it's not in the theatre anymore when I saw it, but it literally was that story that you're describing, at least, Mark, the story that you're describing about Romelu Lukaku and so on. That's exactly what it was. Parents come over to the UK and then they think, because the boy is misbehaving over in the UK, let's take him back to Africa. Actually happened to a neighbour of mine. He went back to Kenya. But in this case, it was taken back to Nigeria. And, the school that they're going to take him to, the headmaster's waiting at the gate for this boy from Europe with a big stick to beat him with into shape. And the boy's begging to be taken. Anyway, I'm just saying that it's remarkable, isn't it, that we see ourselves through the prism of football so often, and it does explain a lot of the issues in society in general. Anyway, this one, I don't know if you've been hearing in the bulletins, a Japanese professional footballer who we have covered in the past here on Up All Night's World Football Phone, and he signed a new contract now with his team at the age of 51. It even hurts me to think about. It pains me in the back because I've got an Achilles injury at the moment. It hurts me there. It hurts me in my heart. It hurts me everywhere to hear about this. He's 51 years old. This is Kazuyoshi Miura. He started his career in 1986, played for teams in Brazil and Europe. He's won the last of his 89 caps for Japan 19 years ago. And in 2017, when we covered the story before, at the age of 50, he broke the long-standing record of Stanley Matthews to become the oldest professional to score a goal. So I'm asking you both, in your regions, who is the Kazuyoshi Miura of South America first?
Well, you can quite often find people like this in Peru. And Peruvian football, sometimes it seems to be like an under-90 competition. Probably because the standard isn't particularly high, so they're able to eke out a living for a considerable period of time. There was a former international forward, Herman Carti, who I think he stopped playing quite recently, but he was mid-40s. He was like 45 and still getting a game in Peru's first division. You wonder in what state he would be waking up in the morning. I was just thinking today, I'm not really into tennis. I don't know if I've ever watched an Andy Murray game, but I was just reflecting on this story and thinking how aggressive top-level sport is. to your body. I'm sure all of us, Mark, and ex-footballers who are in real problems getting around, because of the pounding that their body has taken over the years. So someone like Miura, how on earth is he doing it at that age? You would have thought that after playing a game of football, you won't be able to get out of bed for the next 3 days. And Carty in Peru was doing it well into his mid-40s.
Yeah, the reason why I said let's go South America first, Mark, is because, of course, the recurring question about African footballers is...
Good point. Good point. Yeah.
Yes. Maybe it's unfair against...
We don't need to say it, do we?
Maybe it's unfair to drag in Nwankwo Kanu into this.
He was only 16. Only 16.
It's more like the
30
Beatles.
Years.
No, it's more like the Beatles when I'm 64, isn't it? Anyway,
no, you both been disparaging about the great old African continent. There's no such thing that happens here. We have our best under 23 players in the World Under 20 Championship every single.
And you always win. You always win. Yeah, you always win. On a serious note, when you can actually identify a player's age, and I'm not being disparaging. I know all the issues. I'm the son of a father who once took an affidavit to say that I was 16 years old so that I could go out and work on a Friday and a Saturday night to bring in £3 a week for the family in desperate times. And I was 12 years old at the time. And he saw an affidavit to say my birth certificate had burnt down at some, in some, wherever it was in Africa where the birth certificates were supposed to be. And everybody knew. I worked in Selfridges. I was 12 years old. This guy comes up to me, "Oh, so you're doing your O-levels?" I didn't even know what O-levels were. They all knew. But so I'm not. I swear to you, I'm not being disparaging. But
and can I just take that as an extent? You didn't use that same piece of paper down at the local football club on the weekend, did you, Doc?
I wish I had. If I thought about it, I'd have got into pubs at the age of 14 if I'd thought of it. But it didn't cross my mind, no. And I won't tell you what else I could have done at that age as well. No, on a serious note, for those who we can, those that there is no question mark about their age, who was the oldest player that you've come across in Africa?
In Africa, of course, we've got the very famous Essam El Hadri, who broke the World Cup record just a couple of months ago in Russia. He's 45 now. He'll be, I think... I'm standing under correction. I think his birthday's today, the 11th. I'll check that quickly on the net. But
he's a goalie, though, isn't he?
Yeah.
That doesn't count. You could be 80 years old as a goalie.
No, I think I think that the throwing yourself around. The picture that Tim painted of the physically whacked footballer who wakes up the next morning, barely move out of bed, I think extends. It's like the rock drummer, the goalkeeper is the drummer of the band, and I think they come out of that. They come out of that experience.
Well,
physically more hurt and more injured the next morning.
It's I've played in bands. I could tell you the drummer was always doing push-ups because you need a lot of muscles. A drummer might not be the best analogy, but the keyboard player.
No, I've seen it. I walked into the pub when the East Street Band were in Cape Town. I walked into the same hotel pub, and that Max Weinberg or whatever his name is had his hands in two ice buckets, and everyone else was sort of standing around having a drink, and this poor man was having his post-performance therapy. I think the goalkeepers are like drummers. I think the physical exertion is as much, if not more, at that particular age, and I think you feel it, and therefore the longevity of goalkeepers must be celebrated, perhaps even more than outfield players. Certainly centre backs.
And what did Bruce Springsteen say to you? Did he buy you a drink?
No, I didn't get that close, but it was actually a French journalist friend of mine who was an absolute Springsteen nutter who suddenly pitched up in Cape Town. I said, "What are you doing here?" And he's come to watch the Bruce Springsteen concerts, and I had tickets to it as well. And he said, "Let's go off to the hotel where they're staying and go to the pub and see if there's people there." And certainly was an after party that belonged to the concert, and we walked around and had a look. I met Niels Lofgren, and I saw Max Weinberg put his putting his hands in ice buckets. I'll tell you who else I met on the back of a football connection was Jim Kerr when they were out playing in Cape Town.
That is not bad.
And they had
Simple
a Celtic,
Minds, obviously.
Yeah, they had a Celtic. The drummer had the drum kit had the Celtic logo on it, and I had a friend the girlfriend at that stage who was a music journalist, and she got tickets to the after party, and in fact in the stadium where. Directly after the concert, there were a couple of drinks, and then before going to the after party, you got a ticket to go to both. And it was a very typical sort of South African crowd. There weren't more than 20 or 30 people in this little room, and they had some eats and drinks directly, sort of almost a change room in the bowels of the stadium. And no one went across to talk to the band. And I thought,
it's terrible.
It's completely weird, you know.
That's terrible.
Anyway, I went across to him and we had a little talk about Celtic and the drum kit, etc., etc. And then everybody dispersed, and 20 minutes later arrived at the nightclub. I was there before him, and he sort of walked in and had a look at this cardigan. I was the only one he recognised as the guy who wanted to chat. So he came over to me because I was a celebrity for about 20 minutes with the guy that Jim Kerr knows, you know.
Look, I've got a story that will tickle people's interest, Tim, but I'm going to give you a chance to out-trump Mark on this one.
I can't. I'm just sitting back and listening to you the pair of you name drops. So tell your story, please.
Well, no, it's just Johnny Gill, you know. They had a sort of after-party for him when he came, Johnny Gill of New Edition, all of that. And he's like, rub you the right way. He's got the voice. I haven't. And we go to the after-party, me and this beautiful journalist, and I'm living in Brixton at the time. She's living not far from Brixton, so she promises to drop me off home, okay? Because I don't have a car on this night. So there I am drinking and drinking. She says, right, okay, Don, you ready to go right now? So I say, yeah, sure, you know, I'll go right now if you like. So she basically half throws me into her car, drives at full speed, and I'd rather not say how fast that was, but I'm not guilty, right across London. When we get to Brixton Station, she virtually kicks me out so that she can get back in time for Johnny Gill, because she won't be spending the night in Brixton. Let me just leave it there and move on very swiftly, because we've got Richard with us. Oh, we had Richard with us in Essex. Oh, we've lost him. Richard in Benfleet. Richard, give us a call back. I want to talk to you. We've got Cleo in Aldershot. Cleo the book with us. Hello, Cleo.
Hello, Dotton. Happy New Year to you,
Happy
boys.
New Year to you as well.
And to Steve, and to Mark, happy birthday for a week on Monday.
Ah, thanks, Cleo. You're the only one who ever remembers. I appreciate that.
I know. I hope your wife remembers, doesn't she?
Occasionally.
How can you embarrass the rest of us like that, Cleo? How can you embarrass? I never knew anything about it.
Anyway, before the rest of the yellow card.
Sorry, what was that, Cleo?
Yeah, I missed that.
Before you give me a yellow card, I'll ask my questions quick before the news.
No yellow cards tonight for you. Tim's already got the one.
Buy him a beanstalk. That's what he needs. Buy him a beanstalk.
Can Tim give us an update on Bernardo, the young Brazilian player who got run over by the medical cart? It's gone viral, this video, as I put it on our Facebook page. He had a back injury, and the medical cart came on and run over his foot. And for Mark, my goodness, Egypt have done well. Not only have they got the CAF African Player of the Year, but they've also got the 2019 African Cup of Nations over South Africa, which was a big surprise to me. I thought South Africa, with their infrastructure and holding the 2010 World Cup, would have got it. And also they decided the next 3 African Cup of Nations. Cameroon in 2021, 2023 in the Ivory Coast, and 2025 in
Guinea.
Okay, we'll come to that. We'll come more to the Africa questions in a moment. Let's hear about this, the player who had his foot run over by a medical car in South America, though, Tim.
Yeah, this is a youth tournament that's going on at the moment. It's an under-20 tournament, the São Paulo Cup, which is full of bizarre. Some of the pitches that they play on, because it's a time of the year where it just rains and rains and rains. So you get lots of strange goings on. And this one, this poor player who's writhing around on agony, made much worse by the stretcher then kind of going over his foot. I think he's all right. I remember once talking to the stretcher bearers in the Maracanã, and one of them telling me that he had a black mark on his CV. He'd once dropped a player. He was taking him off the field and it was too heavy and he dropped it. So sometimes no care can be better than a little bit of medical care.
Ouch. And Mark?
Yeah, I think Cleo's surprise at Egypt winning the right to hold the Nations Cup ahead of South Africa is perhaps, the surprise of many, just given the different infrastructures between the two countries. But you've got to understand this decision is really little to do with actual football facilities. It's a very political decision, and South Africa do suffer on the African continent with a bad image. Nobody really likes the arrogance and the haughtiness that South Africa have displayed in their relations with the rest of the continent. And then, of course, there's the direct issue of last year's World Cup vote, the vote for the 2026 World Cup between the joint North American bid of Mexico, Canada, and the US versus Morocco. And South Africa were amongst a handful of African countries who did not vote, who broke ranks, did not vote for Morocco, but rather for the North American bid. The South African vote for the Americans was not a pro-American thing. It was an anti-Moroccan thing because, of course, they have big issues with Morocco over the Western Sahara independence issue. South Africa recognized Western Sahara's liberation movement as an independent country, etc., have diplomatic relations with them, and a very low-level diplomatic relations with Morocco as a result. So that was a purely political decision, and in a way, this is sort of payback time. Morocco were supposed to bid to host this 2019. Egypt said, first of all, they weren't interested, and as soon as Morocco said they were not going to do it, Egypt stepped in again. It was almost as if to block the potential of taking to South Africa being punished for breaking ranks. But it would have been nice to have had it here. But I think a tournament in Egypt's going to be great. It's going to be stinking hot, though. But they've got facilities. They've certainly got the tourist infrastructure. It'll be nice and comfortable. It'll be nice and cheap. And I think if you're in Europe and you can get down to Cairo in June and early July, you'll have a lot of fun watching the African Nations Cup finals.
Any night boats? Night boats going down there?
Yeah, look, I mean, obviously there have been some incidences with tourists, and it's not as safe as it once was. And the tourism industry suffered quite badly because of it. But I mean, they still get a steady influx of tourists there. And I wouldn't. I'm tempted to say it's you taking chances in Rio as well. That's perhaps not the best example, but I think the numbers are still fairly significant in Egypt. Tourism numbers there, and the hotels are all in place, and it is a country with a rather large security apparatus. So hopefully things will be okay.
And you never hear of the Polisario Front anymore, do you, with regards to Western Sahara? And thank you, Cleo. Thanks a lot for that. Now, I know 3 milkmen, all called Richard. Richard in Benfleet in Essex is with us. Good morning.
Hello, Gordon. Hello, guys.
Hi. Are you happy to wait till after the news and sport? I apologise. I was going to go to you, and then I lost you for a moment. Oh, by the way, tonight's editor?
Yeah?
Guess what he used to work as?
Milkman.
Indeed. He told me today he used to work as a milkman. He told me when he dropped some milk bottle on somebody's doorstep, and this is like 4 or 5 o'clock in the morning, and he says how embarrassing that can be. Especially when
it can be.
Yeah. So
you want to drop them inside someone's porch, that's even more embarrassing.
We'll come on to that in just a moment. I want to know how you got into my porch at 4 or 5 o'clock in the morning, but we'll come on to that in just a moment, I promise you. So Richard the Milkman is with us in Essex, and you've got the legend Dino with us in Rio, and we've got the Springbokker Junior with us in Cape Town. Richard, your floor, your platform, go ahead.
Right, yeah. I just wanted to ask Mark, often Tim speaks about the state of the game in South America because all the players get sent abroad and what have you, and it's just seen as a money-making thing, just to bring players on and then sell them on as soon as you can. And I wondered, is that the same thing in Africa, or is Africa a huge store of players that we just never see, that don't get sent abroad, or do they all just come abroad? And it's the same sort of problem, does the same problem exist in Africa as you get in South America?
It varies a lot. I mean, I'll give you the example of Nigeria. In Nigeria, I would reckon, and this is again an unscientific number, but I would reckon the best 200 Nigerian footballers play outside of the country. So if you're half decent in Nigeria, the first thing you do is you get yourself an airline ticket, you get yourself out of there, and you go in search of fame and fortune elsewhere. And it's reflected in the fact that here is one of Africa's most populous countries. It has a decent professional league. It has state support for football clubs. So there's sort of government money going into football, and yet they are paupers really in terms of achievement in continental competition, because the playing base has been so decimated by people leaving. Egypt, on the other hand, and Tunisia and Morocco, perhaps to a lesser extent, don't have hardly any migration of footballers because wages are decent. Clubs are big. You can make a very good living. There's no real desire to leave and go to an alien culture in search of fame and fortune, because you have it at home, and so there's very little migration, and as a result, very strong leagues. I mean, just remember, Africa is a massive continent, very disparate continent. Different languages, as opposed to South America in that extent. I mean, size-wise, perhaps not, but. You can't really paint a continent with a single brush. So there are a lot of different examples. But I would say South America's, from what Tim's told us over the last couple of years, is there's the outlook is a migration to Europe for success, and that is true of your average African footballer as well. But there are many countries where. There is domestic sustainability, if you know what I mean, in terms of football.
Yeah, great answer, Mark, if I might say so. And Richard, great question as well, by the way.
Thank you.
But we haven't discussed what you do as a milkman when you drop a milk bottle on somebody's pool.
Here's one that happened to me last year. Okay, I walked into someone's porch and I just caught my foot on the outside of a door, and I threw a pint of milk onto a tile floor. So there's a load of words and whatever came out. It took me ages to clean it up, all the glass. This is pitch dark, I even had to get one of my old coats and mop up all the milk with a coat. And I thought, well, okay, it's so lovely, that's what happens. When I called for the money at the end of the week, the people said to me, "You gave us a good laugh the other night." And I said, "Really? What?" And he said, "You see that doorbell?" And he pointed to the doorbell. He said, "That's also CCTV." So he said, "We had a right old laugh at your language, and you're so polite on the doorstep, aren't you?" And I thought, luckily they thought it was funny, Well, a deep shade of pink.
Like I say, I know somebody who shares your experience, because our editor tonight, they call him Mr. Bond. Used to be a milkman. Didn't you, Mr. Bond?
I did. I feel like a bit of a fraud. I did it for 3 months about 20 years ago. It was really hard. And I had exactly the same experience of dropping a full milk bottle on the doorstep at about 4:30 in the morning, pitch black, trying to clear it up and trying not to wake up everybody in the house. And then better than that, on my very, very last shift, I went round on a roundabout. I went round the roundabout too fast on a milk float. And one of the crates of empties,
as you do,
one of the crates of empties just flew off. I was heading back. It was like Lethal Weapon or something. Your last day on the job, and it all goes horribly wrong. Smashed milk bottles everywhere, and then I had to go to a local warehouse and pick up a broom. And they were saying, "Oh, you're in terrible." They were really winding me up about it. They went and got me a broom, and I had to go back out onto try and sweep it all up. By the time I got there, a road sweeper had been around anyway and sorted it out, but I was sweating.
Yeah. So can I ask, as someone who lives in a country where the milkman long disappeared? I mean, how do people still get their stuff delivered? Do you still put a little plastic token inside a glass bottle and it gets replaced, or
no? We just have glass bottles. We just have a standing order, so people have an order. And it's not as many people as it used to be by any stretch of the imagination. I mean, we're 22 people covered the town I do. There's only 3 of us now. So you can see the distance is enormous. Instead of plodding around in 5 mile an hour in an electric car, I now speed round in a transit. So
it's coming back in fashion, though, isn't it?
Nice and warm, though.
It's back in fashion now, isn't it, with all the plastic?
It seems to be coming that way.
Backlash.
People seem to be, because everybody's going on about plastic. Yeah.
Do people still leave notes inside the milk bottle saying, an extra gold top for us today?
Yeah, you do get that. What usually happens is a snail will come along halfway through the evening if it's damp and then eat half the note, and you get it. And you think, what does this mean? Does this mean extra pint? No milk? Go away? Whatever. You know. Mainly now, with the march of technology, it's texts. I get up in the morning, turn my phone, and it's beep, 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 so I get loads of texts.
Oh, of course you would. Of course you would. I never. Oh gosh.
Now, how's that? I mean, that's a real cross-generational thing. Texting the milkman. I mean, that's ridiculous.
Yeah, isn't it? Oh gosh. And Mr. Bond, you never explained how you managed to clear up the milk bottle that you dropped on somebody's doorstep. We've heard from Richard about how he got out an old coat to clean it up.
Very, very quietly, while the guy who was training me, this was while I was training, sat in the van. I was trained in a van and then eventually upgraded to a float, laughed all the way through. But we had a dustpan and brush for the glass in the van, and I forget how I cleaned up. I mean, it was 20 years ago. I just remember the panic of waking up the household and ruining their doorstep.
The whole
with loads
street.
Of,
Not just the household, the whole street.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, and it's so very quiet at that time in the morning, and there's nobody about it, and this enormous clatter of glass. You won't believe the noise it makes when it's so quiet as well. I might say as well, with the milk bottle coming back in fashion, I've noticed we have them now in the office here as well. Instead of the big plastic cartons, we've got rid of the plastic cartons, and a lot of the younger generation don't know how to open how to get into the milk bottles. They're trying to peel off the little metal foil, and they don't know you just push down on the top and the whole thing pops off. It is a generation.
And take doing a milk round as being a reflection of what you did in a previous life. You must have been quite good in yours to do 3 months. I've done 37 years, so goodness knows I must have been Adolf Hitler in my previous life.
Well, we'll be talking about the oldest players tonight, so you take our prize for the oldest serving milkman. And thank you,
And
Richard.
what is that? And what is? Can I just ask one more?
Sure.
What is that lifestyle? I mean, if you're up at what time you're up? 3:30, 4:30 in the morning.
At midnight. I go to bed at 6 in the evening and get up at midnight.
Wow.
So things like this are for us out here plodding about in a pitch are a godsend, because you do get fed up. And nowadays you can make a nuisance of yourself by phoning the radio station.
So Dr. Nadabayo is the milkman's. Is the milkman's
yeah, go on.
patron saint? Is he?
Yes, that's it. That's what I like to hear.
He's the milkman of human kindness. He will leave an extra pint.
Even better. And one of these days we'll have a phone-in for all the milkmen that are listening at this time of the morning, Richard. So
brilliant.
Yeah, that would be great, wouldn't it? Genuinely, one of these days I'll arrange it so we have a phone-in for all the milkmen listening at this time of the morning, all the night workers, but particularly the milkmen as well. So, Richard, thanks very much, and I'll
thank you.
Yeah, resume conversation with you shortly, I'm sure. And Mr. Bond, thank you very much.
Oh, you're welcome.
I've got another 12 or 13 minutes of this phone-in to go, so I'm going to rattle through these quick-fire rounds.
And you haven't sung yet either.
No, this is my New Year's resolution, and I don't know how long it will last for. But my wife tells me that if I sing again on air and embarrass her like I've done for the last 20 years on air, I might be singing, singing on my own for a while. Anyway, Simon...
Apologise to her.
Yeah, apologies.
I'm so sorry.
Ah, yes, absolutely. That's what I'll do. One of these days. Look, lots to get through, so let's rattle through this. Suhail in Leeds says, I was at Elland Road tonight to see Bielsa work his magic, but there was a wonderful moment at half-time when former Leeds player Albert Johansson was honoured with a blue plaque presented to his granddaughter. He is fondly remembered at Leeds, just wondering what his legacy is in South Africa. You will know who I'm talking about, Mark.
Yeah, he was the first player of colour to really make an impact in Europe. So he was a massive, massive figure in this country, particularly in the apartheid days, as a successful person who'd come through who'd bucked the system, as it were, and gone on overseas. Tragically, though, alcohol got the better of him. He died a sort of a pauper's death, unknown at the time. Didn't really get the recognition post-football that he perhaps deserved. But in the 60s, when he played in the FA Cup final for Leeds, the coverage here in South Africa, particularly in sort of in the anti-apartheid thing, was absolutely massive, and he really was a big symbol.
Drew,
did he help football become the anti-apartheid sport?
Oh, interesting. Yeah.
No, I think football is already at least this is mid-60s. I think football was already about 5 or 6 years on the forefront of the anti-apartheid battle as sport was. I mean, already in the as early as late 50s, 1960 was the first murmurings of using sport as a weapon to battle against apartheid. And by 64, South Africa was expelled from the Olympics. Didn't compete in the 66 World Cup qualifiers. So by the time Johansson was sort of a visual symbol for people, I think the sporting drum was well being beaten already. But I think what you must remember about the black community in South Africa in those days was that because of apartheid, I mean, they had very few heroes. There were no actors. There were no society was completely subjugated. And here is and people, there were occasional singers. There was Makeba, for example, Masekela, the Trumpist. There were a few who'd gone overseas and got some sort of international profile, but very, very few role models in a way. And so Johansson was absolutely massive in his day.
How about Zola Budd? How has she been regarded in South Africa in those days and then now? Has history and the new South Africa been kind to her or not?
Yeah, I think, look, Zola Budd went off to live in America, so she's not really sort of cognizant in the South African sporting psyche at the moment. She comes back every now and then and runs a race and gets a bit of publicity, but I think people were genuinely a little bit sorry for her. Hers is a tale of naivety, great naivety, exploitation in a way, and at that stage, the apartheid system, the state was so desperate for heroes of its own in a way that she was, that whole British exercise was, I think, in a way, almost pushed by the South African regime of that stage. They wanted to prove the greatness of white South Africanism on the world stage, and even if it was wearing a British athletics vest, an opportunity to show how great our best people were. And so I think she was a little waif of 18 who didn't really understand the pawn that she was in this big sort of political stage show. And I think genuinely across the racial spectrum in this country these days, people have a lot of sympathy for her, because in a way she had no idea what she was getting into, and all the repercussions that came out of it, and then the thing with Mary Slaney in Los Angeles, and I mean her life is just could have been a little bit better if she wasn't exploited as she was by all sides in that whole sorry story.
Was it not Mary Decker?
Mary Decker, that's Mary Decker Slaney.
Decker Slaney.
Yeah. Oh, right,
Slaney
okay.
was her married name, yeah. Sorry.
No, that's okay. I was going to say Zola Budd was a great runner, though. You can't argue with that. Incredible runner. This from Drew in Atlanta. I read once, I think, in Jonathan Wilson's book about Uruguay's team pretending that they were useless at training because they knew they were being spied on. I believe it was in the 1920s during one of the Olympics. Could Tim shed any light on this, and could the panellists think of other occasions where teams have conned?
Yeah, he was probably there covering it.
Yeah, I think he is. He claims he's only 18, but trust me, we know that Tim's as old as Rip Van Winkle. Anyway, could the panellists...
It was the 1924 Olympics, and 1924 is the year that my dad was born, so I'm innocent of that charge. I couldn't possibly have been around. It's an impossibility.
Okay, you got away with that one.
That's the story, that Uruguay had come over for the Olympics there in Paris, and no one knew who they were. And I think it was the first opponent was Yugoslavia or something, and there was a story of the Yugoslav sent a spy to have a look, and Uruguay just messed around. Whether that is just football folklore, I don't really know. I would be inclined to think that maybe Yugoslavia wouldn't even have bothered, because no one really knew who they were. No one was expecting anything from Uruguay at all. It's only in hindsight that we recognise what a great side that they were, and the enthusiasm with which they won that gold medal was extraordinary. And I think it really did create the modern game. But part of the thing of it being extraordinary was that no one had even really heard of them before. So I'm not even sure that the opposition would have gone to the lengths of sending spies to have a look at them.
Yeah, and do you remember the question that I asked earlier? What difference does it make? Can you think of either of you, in your prospective leagues or even beyond them, a difference that it makes, or just philosophically, can it make any real difference?
Of course it can.
We heard Frank Lampard. We heard Frank Lampard on the bulletin saying, "Look, I'm not going to make any excuses for our performance. We lost the match 2-0 to Leeds. We lost the match 2-0." And yet even though they were the subject of the spying allegations or spying confession by Marcelo Bielsa, he's saying that wasn't what lost us the game. So what difference does it really make then? Tim, you go first.
Well, remember, there's a deadline of when to hand in your team sheet. And some coaches will really, really push that and hand it on deadline or sometimes even later because half of the battle is the opposition. In football, in order to impose your own game, you want to neutralise the opposition. And in order to do that, you want to know what the opposition are going to do. Now, from Bielsa's point of view, he's coming to a new league. I suspect that maybe 2 years ago, he wouldn't even have heard of many of the teams that are in the Championship. And he's an absolute obsessive. He's going to want to know everything that he possibly can about these sides in order to know how to counter them. It's the old, what's the old Chinese book, Art of War, Sun Tzu. Know yourself.
You're right. Sorry.
Whatever. Apologies for my ignorance, but the key to the battle is know yourself and also know your enemy. Know what the opposition are trying to do. So obviously, little things like what the formation is going to be. One team will try and keep that under wraps for as long as possible, and if you've got a heads up on that, that gives you a little advantage.
Mark?
Yeah, and imagine if you have access to your opponent's routines. If because by being able to watch their training sessions, you understand exactly what they're going to do at set pieces, which is a very big part of the game these days. Corner routines, free kick routines, how they take them, how they defend them. I mean, it's a massive advantage if you're able to get that kind of insider information. That's why we have so many behind closed doors training sessions, and understandably so too.
But does it not? And the reason why I was trying to interject there was that if the opposition is concentrating on your game rather than their own game, is that helpful?
No, but I think what Tim said earlier is it's a part of it. I mean, there is a school of thought normally from managers who don't have a plan who always tell you, we're concentrating on our game, we're not so worried about the opposition. But decent managers, in my opinion, do a lot of research, and I think that's been the modern trend as well. I mean, the emergence of people like Mourinho, etc., has been based on their early successes based on the fact that they brought the study of the opposition to a new and very sophisticated and successful level.
Yeah, Kevin Birmingham.
A few years ago, I saw an interview with Graham Souness talking about his time with Liverpool. And he was saying that they never, ever discussed the opposition. Never, ever. They had one team meeting before the 84 European Cup final, when they went out for a training session and they couldn't train because the conditions were horrible. So they came back and suddenly, we're going to have a team meeting. What's he going to say in the team meeting? And the coach said something like, they're a good side, Roma. They're a good side. They've got some good players, but we're better. And that was it. Then it was on the bus, and that's all very well, but I'm not sure you can get away with that these days. I think little details make a difference.
Yeah, and I mean, I remember when Villas-Boas was appointed Chelsea manager, they were kind of explaining who this young unheralded man was, and they printed, I think in the Garden, they printed sort of his notes that he used to make for Mourinho when he'd go and watch the team 5 games ahead, the opponent 5 games ahead, the notes on the free kicks and the corners and how they defended throw-ins. And I mean, it was pages and pages of sophistication, really, which is part of the development of the game. Absolutely fascinating. And I think in the last 10 years we've seen the emergence of these different kinds of managers because of the study of the opposition. The opposition is a very important part of planning.
Shining Cumbria is convinced that, she wants you to explain a bit further what they spray on pitches in Africa, Mark.
Well, it could be urine. Maybe it's a little concoction of herbs and liquid and herbs. It depends on what the Muti man tells you to make. I mean, first of all, you've got to go to the Muti guy and say, listen, I need to win Saturday's match. Can you fix it for me? And then he'll give you a price, and then he'll give you a potion, and he'll tell you what to do. sometimes he might tell you to do something ridiculous, like, you know, walking on your head for 5 minutes, or you know, sometimes a lot of local players tell great stories of going off to a bath in a hotel room. You know, one hotel room uses the Muti bath, and there's sheep's entrails and all sorts of herbs and bushes, and just absolutely disgusting smells, and then losing the match the next day. And then there's a new Muti man next week, you know, with hopefully a more successful concoction.
And which makes the biggest impact, the spying or the Muti man?
No, the Muti man's fabulous. I mean, long may he live. It's a great part of the game.
Mark, thank you very much. Tim, many thanks. Look forward to reconvening
multitask,
soon.
isn't he, Gleeson?
Well, there you go. He's very multitask. Thank you very much, both of you.